I'm just going to share now. Can I call you back? Okay. We're coming from Shavuos, and we're not just coming from Shavuos, because Shavuos was a few days ago, but also because we're now in the midst of the Yemei Tashlumin. Let me explain what Tashlumin is. Every Yom Tiv, 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, Yidden would be required to go and visit the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Tiv. That's why they're called the Shalosh Golem, the foot festivals. And when you came for Yom Tiv to the Beis Hamikdash, you had to bring a minimum of 2 sacrifices. One was a carbon oila, a burnt offering, which is called an oila siriyah. That was in conjunction with coming to visit the Beis Hamikdash. The pasuk says, "V'lo yiro panei reikam," you shouldn't appear empty-handed. So therefore, you had to bring a carbon oila, and as well as a carbon shlamim to celebrate the Yom Tiv. There's a mitzvah on the. This is a carbon chagiga, a carbon of celebrating the Yom Tiv, the carbon shlamim, peace offering. Certain parts of the carbon were burnt on the mizbeach, certain parts of the carbon were given to the kohanim, and the bulk of the carbon was eaten by the person who brought the carbon and his family and his guests, and they celebrated it. Now, by Pesach and Sukkot, if you didn't manage to bring the karbanis on the first day of Yom Tiv, and as far as if the first day of Yom Tiv was on Shabbos, you couldn't bring the karbanis on the first day of Yom Tiv. So you had the whole Chol HaMoed to make up for it. And if you didn't manage for some reason Chol HaMoed, the last day of Yom Tiv was a possibility. However, on Shavuos, there's only one day, and there's no Chol HaMoed. And if that day falls on Shabbos, like it does this year, you're really up a creek, because you can't bring personal karbanos on Shabbos. So when do you bring the karbanos? You have to bring the Beis Hamikdash when you visit for Shavuos. So our Chachamim derive from a pasuk, B'chag hamatzos u'b'chag haShavuos, that the same laws that apply to Pesach apply to Shavuos. Just like Pesach, there's 7 days in which to bring the karbanos. So on Shavuos, there's 7 days in which to bring the karbanos. So from the first day of Shavuos, from the day of Shavuos, the time of the Beis Hamikdash was only 1 day, and in the Beis Hamikdash was only 1 day. So from Shavuos, you have another 6 days in which to be mashlim, in which to make up for the karbanos that should have been brought when you came to the Beis Hamikdash for Shavuos, but didn't manage to bring them on the first day. You can bring them another 6 days, just like you can on Pesach. And that's why, until the 12th of Sivan, if you count from the first day of Shavuos, until the 30th of Sivan, if you count from the second day of Shavuos, it's called the Yemei Tashlumin, the days of making up for what you might have missed over Shavuos. And the custom is, quite a widespread custom, is becoming more widespread, that until then, we don't say Tachna. We're still celebrating the Yom Tov of Shavuos. So even though nowadays we don't have a Beis Hamikdash and we don't bring karbanos, but the fact that it was done so in the time of the Beis Hamikdash makes these days special. And the word Tashlumin means, first of all, making up for. So whatever we were supposed to achieve over the Yom Tov of Shavuos, the sense of being makabel b'Torah, b'simcha, b'pnimius, we can still make up for it until 12th of Sivan, which is tomorrow. And perhaps the 13th of Sivan, if you want to stretch it to count to the second day, which is Friday. And the word Tashlumin doesn't only mean making up for what was missing, it also comes from the word shleimus, bringing more perfection. So even if you did do everything you could have done, in the sense of celebrating Shavuos properly and properly receiving the Torah joyously and internalizing it, there's always room for improvement. You can always have an upgrade. So throughout the days of Tashlumin, there's special opportunity to upgrade our Kabbalah Torah b'simcha b'pnimius. Therefore, these days are very much connected with Shavuos, and we're still in the spirit of Matan Torah and Kabbalah Torah. With this in mind, I decided to open the Shiur today, sharing a thought that has to do with Kabbalah Torah. Now, the papers that you have in front of you, there's 2 sides to the paper. One side is Torah Shebiksav, and one side is Torah Shebal Peh. One side is Chumash, and one side is Talmud and Rambam and Chilta. So we're going to start from the Torah Shabbat Test side, the side that looks like this. Okay? So this is a quoting from a Gemara in Krisus, where the Gemara talks about a pasuk in Parshas Shlach, which says, Kochem Kager, that the same laws that apply to you apply to the convert. And the Gemara says, and I'll tell you where to find it in the Gemara, the Rabbi Omer, Rabbi is the last word on the line, about 8 lines from the top of the page, and Omer is the first word on the line. Omer is the first word of the line, about 9 lines from the top of the page. Good morning, Mrs. Safran, a big mazel tov to you. Should have a lot of nachas. Mrs. Safran's grandson became a chassid. Wonderful, wonderful. Huh? Sorry? I'm fine with the poll. Please, no mind. Spare one there. So the pasuk says, Kochem Kager, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Omer. Again, the word Rabbi is about 8 lines from the top of the page, the last word on the line, and the word Omer is the first word on the 9th line. You see where it says Rabbi Omer? Yeah? So Rabbi Omer, Rabbi says, Kochem Kavesechem. When it says, just like you, so the convert, which means the convert should have to do everything that you have to do, it means like your forefathers. Just like your forefathers entered into a covenant with Hashem through circumcision, immersion in a mikveh, and the sprinkling of the blood. So when a convert comes to convert, the way that they enter into the covenant is they need circumcision, immersion, and sprinkling of the blood of the carbon. And the Gemara discusses what carbon they have to bring, and there's a discussion elsewhere about what to do nowadays when there is no Beis Hamikdash. Can a convert actually complete the conversion properly without a Beis Hamikdash, without a carbon? And the answer is yes, they can. And when the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, they still have to bring the carbon that they were meant to bring at the time of their conversion. But essentially, conversion consists of 3 conditions: circumcision in the case of a male, immersion in a mikveh, and offering of a sacrifice with the blood of the sacrifice is sprinkled. Then, if you look a little bit lower in the Gemara says, Amar Mar, just the 4 lines from the bottom of this paragraph, Amar Mar, we learned before, just like your forefathers entered the covenant through the 3 components of circumcision, immersion, and a sacrifice. So the Gemara asks, I understand the circumcision part of the story. The Chesiv, it says in the pasuk, and all the nation that left Egypt were circumcised because they had to bring a carbon pesach when they left Egypt, and they could only eat from the carbon pesach if they were circumcised. So therefore, they had to circumcise themselves when they left Egypt. Inami mehacha, or it could be derived from the following pasuk, a pasuk that we quote in the Haggadah every Pesach. Va'ever alayich, it says, I passed by you. And I saw you wallowing in your blood. And I said to you, you shall live with your blood. And again, the pasuk repeats again. And our sages tell us that the repetition of 2 times is 2 bloods that the Jewish people encountered when they left Egypt: the blood of the Paschal lamb, of the carbon pesach, and the blood of the circumcision, dam pesach and dam milah. So we know that the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were circumcised. How do we know that there was the sprinkling of the blood? It says in the pasuk by Matan Torah, by Yishlach as Nari b'nei Yisrael, that Moshe sent the young lads of the Jewish people, and it says over there that it refers to the firstborn, the Kayanim, who were the Bechayrim, the firstborn, who were the Kayanim at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and they were sent to offer sacrifices on behalf of the entire Jewish people. So we know that there were sacrifices. Elot Tvila, but what about immersion? Where do we find immersion by Yetzias Mitzrayim? And unfortunately, there's a line missing over here. It should have had another line included. And the Gemara says that that Moshe took the blood of the covenant and sprinkled it on the nation. He sprinkled the blood on the Jewish people. And since we know a klal that ein hazah b'lei tefillah, you cannot sprinkle the blood of a carbon on someone unless they have immersed in a mikveh. So we know for sure that the Jewish people immersed themselves in mikvahs. So at the foot of Har Sinai, they had a lot of mikvahs, and everybody tabled in the mikveh before Matan Torah. This is So we know that the Jewish people at the time of Matan Torah experienced all three components of circumcision, immersion, and the sprinkling of the blood of the cart. Sure.
So as they left Egypt, the men...
It was a desert, though.
weren't some of them grist before when they were in
the tribe of Levi kept circumcision in Egypt. The rest of the Jewish people did not. And when they left Egypt, they all had to be circumcised in order to eat of the Karban Pesach. It says that there were those who weren't so excited about it. Then Moshe Rabbeinu offered his Karban Pesach, and the smell of the roasted Karban Pesach became so tempting that they couldn't contain themselves, and they all agreed to be circumcised and eat from the Karban Pesach.
So Moshe was the one who did it about circumcising one of his sons.
He was delayed.
His wife
Doesn't say he wasn't going to circumcise. The question was, should he first fulfill Hashem's instruction of going back to Egypt? Does Hashem instruct him to go right away? Or should he first circumcise his son? This was the question. Anyway, so to move on. So this is the halacha that, if you look at the Rambam, which brings the halacha, the first halacha is B'shleisha Dvarim Nitnusu Yisrael Lebris. There's three components with which the Jewish people. You see the next paragraph, the Rambam, Perek Shleisha Asar, halacha Aleph. B'shleisha Dvarim Nitnusu Yisrael Lebris B'milah Tefillah B'Karban. There's three components with which the Jewish people entered into the covenant: with circumcision, with immersion, and with a sacrifice. And then he says in halacha Daled, the same applies for all generations. If a non-Jew wants to enter into the covenant and to protect himself under the wings of the divine presence, the Kabbalah of El Torah, and accept upon himself the yoke of Torah, he needs to have circumcision, immersion, and a sacrifice. If it's a female, tefillah b'karban, then immersion and a sacrifice. Shemar, as the pasuk says, we just quoted in the Gemara, kachem kageh. You, the same for you as for a convert. Ma'atam b'milah tefillah b'atzoas karban. Just like when you entered the covenant, it consisted of immersion, of circumcision, immersion, and sacrifice. Af hager l'dayra, so a convert for all generations. B'milah tefillah b'atzoas karban. It has to be circumcision, immersion, and a karban. Okay. Now the question is, when was the sprinkling of the blood? When Moshe sent the young lads to make the karbanos for everyone, and when they sprinkled the blood, they obviously had to immerse first. So that's where there was immersion and the sprinkling of the blood of the karban. Now, if you turn the page over, you'll see in Parshas Mishpatim, right? You see this page is in Parshas Mishpatim. You have exactly the psukim that we're looking for. Pasuk Hey has the pasuk Vayishlach as Nari b'nei Yisrael. He sent the young lads of the Jewish people. They offered burnt offerings. And they drilled peace offerings, bullocks. Moshe took half of the blood and put it in containers. Half he sprinkled on the altar. And then it says in pasuk Ches, Moshe took the blood and he sprinkled it on the nation by Yemer, and he said, here this is the blood of the covenant that Hashem has arranged with you for all these matters that we spoke about earlier. So we have the sources over here for the entire story of how the Jewish people entered into the covenant and how they underwent all the halachic requirements of conversion. The question is, when did this happen? When did this happen? So it's in Parshas Mishpat. Matan Torah happened in Parshas Yisro. And this is the end of Parshas Mishpat. So this is also the Naso v'Nishma is also in this story. The Jewish people said Naso v'Nishma. So when did all this happen? So Rashi says that all this happened on the 5th of Sivan. The 5th of Sivan, a day before Matan Torah. So Parshas Yisro, the revelation of Sinai, happened on the 6th of Sivan. And the end of Parshas Mishpatim, we're backtracking to the 5th of Sivan. And it follows the rule of Ein Mukdam U'Me'ucher B'Torah. There's no chronological order in the Torah. So you can have something that happened on the 6th of Sivan in Parshas Yisro, and something that happened on the 5th of Sivan, a Sedra later, in Parshas Mishpatim. Okay? Where does Rashi get this from? So we have actually a Mechilta. On the bottom of this page, there is a copy here from the Mechilta, Now, if you look at after the Shmos Chavdalad, see where it says Shenemar Shmos Chavdalad. Vayikach Moshe es Hadam Yizrak al Ha'am. Moshe took the blood and he sprinkled it on the nation. Amar Lahem, he said to them, Atem Kshurim Anuvim Tfusim. Now you're roped in. Yeah, now that he sprinkled the blood on them, now you're all tied in, you're roped in. Machar tomorrow, Bayu, come along, V'kibul Aleichem HaMitzvahs Kulam, and accept upon yourself all the mitzvahs. So when he says tomorrow, come and accept upon yourself all the mitzvahs, what does that imply? That implies that everything that's described on this page happened on the 5th of Sivan, and he told them, tomorrow, stand by the foot of Sinai, Hashem will reveal himself to you, and then we will accept all the mitzvahs. Yeah, so that's the source of this concept that the Naso and Nishma happened on the 5th of Sivan. Actually, the Gemara says so as well. But then the Mechilta brings another opinion. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda Eimer. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with this, and he says, "Boi bayayim nasu kol hamas." On this very day, all this took place. What does it mean on this very day? The day of Matan Torah, the 6th of Sivan. So when it says in the pasuk, "Vayashke Moshe got up early in the morning, he built an altar, and he sent the young lads to offer karbanos, and he sprinkled the blood on the Jewish people," which the Talmud tells us also includes immersion in the mikveh. When did all this happen? According to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, it happened on the morning of Matan Torah. According to the Tanna Kama, it happened the day before Matan Torah. According to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, it happened on the morning of Matan Torah. Now the problem is, which day of the week was Matan Torah? So the Gemara says in Shabbos that there's a machlekes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi which day of the month it was. Tanna Kama says it was the 6th of Sivan, and Rabbi Yossi says it was the 7th of Sivan. But both agree, Kula Alma Shabbos Nitna Torah, but everybody agrees that it was the 7th day of the week, it was Shabbos. Yeah? So if everybody agrees that it was Shabbos, so the day of Matan Torah was Shabbos. According to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, this process of conversion that included the sprinkling of the blood and the immersion took place on Shabbos. Now that poses a bit of a problem, because we look at the Rambam that we have right in front of us, where he says in Halacha Vav, the second part of Halacha Vav, he says Hadavar tzarich bezdin, tzarich litbel b'fnei shleisha. You have to, the ger has to immerse himself in a mikveh in the presence of a bezdin of three dayanim. Since it needs since this requires a bezdin, ein matbil nesi b'Shabbos, so you cannot perform it on Shabbos. Bezdin doesn't function on Shabbos, so you can't perform a conversion on Shabbos. The Gemara in Yevamos actually says another reason why you can't perform a conversion on Shabbos, and that is because just like you can't fix a vessel on Shabbos, you can't fix a person on Shabbos. Person was a non-Jew, and then he becomes a Jew, that's like fixing him. And you can't fix on Shabbos. So you can't perform a conversion on Shabbos. So the question is, if you can't perform a conversion on Shabbos, and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says, that all these things happened on the day of Matan Torah, how were they able to perform a conversion on Shabbos? Now, the simple answer would be, now, what is the problem of performing conversion on Shabbos? Either because you have to use a bezdin doesn't function on Shabbos, or because you are fixing a person, tikkun gavna. You can't fix a person on Shabbos. Yeah. However, both those prohibitions are only rabbinic prohibitions. Since they're only rabbinic prohibitions, maybe they weren't a problem at that time. But we know that Avraham Avinu already kept the whole Torah, including Eruv Tavshil, which is also rabbinic. In fact, Rashi says on the pasuk in Parshas told us by Yishmer Mishmarti, he kept my guardings. So Rashi says Shavuos, the Shabbos. The guardings are those things that the Chachamim instituted to guard us against violating the Torah, which the prohibitions of the Chachamim on Shabbos were instituted to protect us from violating biblical prohibitions. And Avraham Avinu already kept them. So the Jewish people were aware, and don't forget, they began to keep Shabbos at Mara. Shabbos is, they didn't start keeping by Matan Torah. We mentioned this last week. They started keeping Shabbos at Mara already. So they're already keeping Shabbos. So isn't it a little bit strange? It doesn't smell right that the Jewish people should enter into their experience of entering into the covenant, becoming Yidden, through a desecration of Shabbos, albeit a rabbinic desecration. But at the end of the day, it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. That's not what Shabbos is, and this is their acceptance of the yoke of mitzvahs. They're turning into Jewish people now. They're becoming a Jewish people through a desecration of Shabbos. Especially, there's also an opinion. There's a Trumas Hadeshen, which is one of the early commentaries, who says the reason that you're not allowed to perform a circumcision on Shabbos, except when it's correct, it's the 8th day, is because there's one of the 39 malachas on Shabbos is Makabapatish, the last bang with the hammer. When a craftsman creates a piece of work, so the last bang with the hammer is when it's all complete. So at the point where it's all complete, that is that he gives that last bang with the hammer, completing it. That's the malacha. So he says that performing a circumcision on Shabbos is like finishing the job. It becomes a full yid, a full-fledged yid when the baby becomes a full-fledged yid when you circumcise. And that's the malacha of Makam Patish. And some of the commentaries say that according to that, it should be biblically forbidden to make a conversion on Shabbos, because when you convert a convert, that's when he becomes a full-fledged Jew. And that is like Makam Patish. That's like the final blow with the hammer. And that is a biblical prohibition, according to some opinions. So in any case, whether it's biblical or rabbinic, it surely doesn't seem to be right to make the conversion of the entire Jewish people in a way that is not on Shabbos, in a way that's forbidden on Shabbos. So a simple solution would be to say that when Rabbi Yehuda says, Naso that happened that day, what's he referring to? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, actually in his interpretation, his commentary on this Chumash, disagrees with Rashi. Rashi makes it all mixed up, right? Yisrei happened on the 6th of Sivan. Mishpatim, the end of Mishpatim was on the 5th of Sivan. Ramban says, based on the Eben Ezra, he says there's no need to make it so complicated. He says the way it worked is very simple. The Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan, Parshas Yisrei. Then right after Matan Torah, it says Hashem said to Moshe, you should speak to the Jewish people, tell them not to make any graven images, make me an altar of earth. That was all said right after the Shabbos HaDibros. And then the Eila Mishpatim Hashem told Moshe all the Mishpatim, all the laws that you should tell them. Whole Parshas Mishpatim. And then he told Moshe to go through the process of that is described over here, which included the immersion and the karbanis. That was all. Yash came Babaikar. He woke up the next morning, the morning after Matan Torah, and that's when he did it all. So according to that, and he says that this is what Rabbi Yehuda means when he says Naso, he means the following day, on Sunday. Doesn't sound right with the words.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
This is a problem there.
Yeah, but this is what the Ramban says, that it happened the following day. So according to the Ramban, that it all happened on Sunday morning, it's not a problem. Right? Torah was given on Shabbos. On Sunday morning, they did the immersion and the altar and the sacrifices and the sprinkling of the blood. It all happened on Sunday.
I saw that in all this, the tefillah and the cleaning of the blood and the river would be
A preparation.
Preparation for that. So how
Rashi agrees with you and the Gemara agrees with you. But the Rabbi Yehuda, according to the way the Ramban interprets it, says it was the next day. Okay? And you'll see in a minute why there's a strong leaning in that direction. But you're right as far as Rashi and the Gemara are concerned. You're 100% right. Yeah, it sounds bad. Yeah. Sorry. Same question. Okay. Also, when it says Boy Bayayim Nasu Oisam Hamasim, the simple meaning is it was on that very day, the day of Matan Torah. Right? The Ramban is stretching the meaning of those words by Bayim to say what he said. But top it all is a Medrash Lekach Toiv, and the Medrash Lekach Toiv says explicitly that according to Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, it happened on the morning before Matan Torah. Okay, so happened on the morning before Matan Torah, right? The morning of Matan Torah, just before Matan Torah, on the day of Matan Torah, in the morning. Rabbi Yosef says, Naso, and it all happened that very day. Means Moshe got up in the morning of Matan Torah. He arranged for a mizbeach. He arranged for karbanos, sprinkled the blood, which the Gemara says includes also immersion, and they went ahead with receiving the Aseres HaDibros. No. That, according to this, there was the day of Matan Torah, so on the Shabbos. So we're back to our problem of how you can perform a conversion on Shabbos. Yeah? Now, you could say that even though the Gemara says Kula Alma b'Shabbos Nitna Torah, that everybody agrees the Torah was given on Shabbos, the Gemara doesn't mean everybody. The Gemara means these two opinions that the Gemara quotes from a comment of Yosi, who argue whether it was the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan, they both agree that it was on Shabbos. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody holds it was on Shabbos. In fact, in the Mechilta, it says that the Torah was given on a Friday. So perhaps Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda in the Mechilta follows the opinion of the Mechilta that the Torah was given on a Friday. And if the Torah was given on a Friday, the immersion took place on a Friday, the offerings were brought on a Friday, and everybody's happy, everything is good. However, again, the Medrash Lekach Toiv says clearly that it was the morning of Matan Torah, and it was Shabbos. So back to our question, according to Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, that the immersion and the sacrifices and the whole process took place on the day of Matan Torah, which was Shabbos, how could the immersion take place on Shabbos? Okay, so that's our question. How could the immersion of the entire Jewish people in accepting the Torah and the sprinkling of the blood, the whole process of conversion, how could it have taken place on Shabbos? So, as we say many times, a Jew answers a question with a question. We'll ask another question. The other question is, the Gemara says that conversion has 3 components, right? Circumcision, immersion, and sprinkling of the blood of the cart. Oh, 1 minute. Isn't there something very, very basic missing over here? Is that what conversion conversion consists of? Circumcision, immersion, and sprinkling of the blood? There's something so basic that's missing over here. Study, but even more important than study is only a preparation. The most important thing is, anybody? Well, we said immersion. Accepting the mitzvahs. Right? Isn't that the most important component of conversion? How does the Gemara say that conversion consists of immersion, circumcision, immersion, and carbon? What happened to the acceptance of the mitzvah? Seems to be the most important part. So the answer is, the Gemara says that when you undergo a conversion, you need to have 3 conditions. But what does it mean to undergo a conversion? Those are conditions in undergoing a conversion. But the meaning of undergoing a conversion is accepting upon yourself Yiddishkeit. If you're not accepting upon yourself Yiddishkeit, you're not undergoing a conversion. In fact, this is very clearly in the Rambam. Look at the Rambam. You have in front of you the Rambam on this page right here, right? So you have over here the Rambam in Dalet, Halacha Dalet. It says, "V'chein l'doros." So throughout the generations, Sheyirtza ha'akum l'ikanos l'bris. When a non-Jew wants to enter the covenant, and to be protected under the wings of the Shechina, and accept upon himself the yoke of Torah, when he's ready to do that, then he needs milah, tefillah, v'atzos carbon. But first, obviously, before you can talk about circumcision, immersion, and carbon, the first thing is you have to want to accept Torah mitzvahs. If you don't want to accept Torah mitzvahs, there's nobody home. There's nothing to talk about. There's no conversion at all. When you want to undergo a conversion, the way that the conditions that need to be met are immersion, circumcision, immersion, and carbon. But if there's no conversion, there's nothing to talk about. Yeah, is that clear? No. Why not?
How can they about the covenant, the Torah? If they say Naso Nishma before, it's already a covenant.
So the question is, in the story of Matan Torah, where was Kabbalah Mitzvahs? Where was Kabbalah Mitzvahs? Where did the Jewish people accept upon themselves all the mitzvahs? So the simple answer is, sure, it's on every tip of everybody's tongue, Naso and Ishma. Right? Jewish people said Naso and Ishma, didn't they? So the question is, what did Naso and Ishma consist of? So the general perception is that Naso and Ishma was they said we're going to keep all the mitzvahs, right? But let's look at the story in the Chumash. So look at the page we have over there, Chumash and Rashi. So it says, Pasuk Gimel, on top of the page. Moshe came along. He told the nation all the words of Hashem. What are all the words of Hashem? We'll soon see. And he's called Mishpatim and all the laws. What is called Mishpatim? I would think Parshas Mishpatim, no? Well, let's see. Ayan kol ha'am, and the entire nation responded, Kol echad, in one voice. Vayemru, and they said, Kol advarim asher diber Hashem nasa. Everything Hashem said, we're going to do. Yeah, sounds very good. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi Gimel. It's called Divrei Hashem. Rashi says, what are all the words of Hashem? Remember, this is the 5th of Sivan. What were all the words of Hashem that Moshe told them? Mitzvah's Prisha, the mitzvah of separating from their wives for 2 days before the Torah is given. V'Hagbala, the mitzvah of making boundaries around Har Sinai. Eis kol mishpatim, and all the laws means mitzvahs shenistavu b'nei Noach. The 7 mitzvahs of b'nei Noach. The Shabbos, Kibbud of Aim, Shabbos, honoring parents, Upar Aduma, and the red heifer, the Dinim Shnitna Mamara, and the other laws that were given to them Mamara. Because Moshe could only tell them what they had. What did they have at this point? They had Shabbat mitzvahs b'nei Noach. They had Shabbos, Upar Aduma, Kibbud of Aim, and a few more laws. That's what he told them. And on that they said, everything that Hashem said, we will do. Let's go a little further. Pasuk Zayin. Yikach Sefer Habris. Moshe took the Sefer Habris. Anybody familiar with such a sefer called Sefer Habris? You have one in your library, Sefer Habris? Yikach Sefer Habris. Moshe took a Sefer Habris. Vayikra ba'oznei ha'am, the book of the covenant. Vayikra ba'oznei ha'am, and you read it in the ears of the nation. Vayomru, and they said, Kol asher diber Hashem, everything that Hashem said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Yeah, absolute acceptance. So Rashi Sefer Habris. What's a Sefer Habris? Mi Breishis v'ad Matan Torah. He read to them the Torah from Breishis until Matan Torah. Mitzvahs shenitztavu b'mara, and plus the mitzvahs that were commanded in Mara. So he didn't read to them the whole Torah. He read to them whatever happened until now, up till Matan Torah. So when they said Naso and Ishma, according to Rashi, what were they Naso and Ishma about? They were saying Naso and Ishma on everything that there is in the Torah before Matan Torah. Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Shabbos, Paradum, and Kibbud Avayim.
If he read from Bereshit until, and the fact that they had Yosef with them,
the casket of Yosef.
You say that they forgot their personal story from Abraham, for example.
It's irrelevant if they forgot it. They didn't forget. What did Moshe read to them? He could only read to them what they had. He read to them what happened until now, right? The whole story from Bereshit till Matan Torah, not the story and all the laws that they were given, but only what they were given until there. Yeah, and that they said Naso and Ishma. So was that Kabbalah mitzvahs? They haven't been told the mitzvahs. They didn't accept upon themselves any mitzvahs. They only accepted upon themselves what was given already until then. So what kind of a conversion could there be without Kabbalah mitzvahs? And even according to the Gemara, that says that Naso and Ishma implies was an acceptance of the whole Torah. But if it took place on the 5th of Sivan, as the Gemara says, and as Rashi says, which the Torah hadn't been given yet, can you accept something which doesn't yet exist? We know in the laws of buying and selling, you can't make an acquisition on something that doesn't yet exist. You can only buy something that exists. You can only commit yourself to something that exists. So if the Torah wasn't given yet, the Torah didn't exist yet, How could they say Naso v'nishma? How could it be a truly meaningful Naso v'nishma if there was no Torah to accept? They could say the Torah which will be given tomorrow we will accept, but that acceptance is not a legal acceptance. It doesn't exist. And even if they had an inkling of what it's all about, because Avraham Avinu studied Torah, and Yitzchak Avinu studied Torah, and Yaakov Avinu studied Torah, and Shiur Shem Ever they taught Torah, and the Shevet Levi learned Torah, Mitzrayim, and perhaps they did have an inkling of what was going on. But the intensity of what Torah is after Matan Torah, when Vayeled Hashem al Har Sinai, when Hashem Himself descends upon Har Sinai and says, "Anoichi Hashem Elokecha," and we spoke about this. Anoichi is Rashatevis Anon Nafshi Ksavis Yavis. Hashem says, "I've taken my very self, I've written it into the Torah, and I've given over to you." So from now on, a mitzvah is one with the essence of Hashem. From now on, Torah is Eiraisa v'Kutshabrichu Kol Echad. Hashem and the Torah are one. They didn't have such a Torah. The Shevet Levi studied Torah Mitzrayim. It wasn't the Torah in which the essence of Hashem was part of the Torah. That hadn't happened yet. That happened only by Matan Torah. So how could they take on something which didn't exist yet? So therefore, when was the Kabbalah mitzvahs? When was the full acceptance of the mitzvahs? The full acceptance of the mitzvahs was when Hashem appeared on Mount Sinai and gave them the Aseres HaDibros, which included the whole Torah, because the 620 letters in Aseres HaDibros, which correspond to the 613 mitzvahs, plus the 7 mitzvahs that Rabbanim, was all given by Mount Torah. So when Hashem appeared on Har Sinai and gave them the Torah, that was their Kabbalah mitzvah. But that was on Shabbos, but that was after. You're right. That was on Shabbos after, but that was by Hashem. Hashem did that. It wasn't their immersion or their sprinkling of the blood that completed that process. In other words, in a case where a convert converts nowadays, the order is first he accepts all the mitzvahs. First the Bezdin tells him the severe mitzvahs and the lighter mitzvahs and the punishment for violating the mitzvahs, and then he immerses, and then he becomes a convert. So what clinches what completes the process? The conversion. The immersion, I'm sorry. The immersion is the completion of the process. So that you can't do on Shabbos, because that fixes the vessel. That's a Bezdin achieves a whole new reality is created by his immersion. You can't do that on Shabbos. But by Matan Torah, it worked the other way around. First, they prepared themselves by circumcising themselves, and then immersing in a mikveh, and then having the blood of the carbon sprinkled on them. But they didn't become Geidim yet, because they were missing the most important component of Geidus, which is Kabbalah mitzvahs. When did they have Kabbalah mitzvahs? Only by Matan Torah. So the completing of the process was not through the immersion, as it is nowadays. The completing of the process was through hearing Hashem's voice at Sinai. So therefore, there's no prohibition for that to take place on Shabbos. Because only nowadays, when the immersion in the mikveh completes the process of conversion, it can't be done on Shabbos. But their immersion was only a preparation for the completing of the process, which was by Matan Torah. That was later. At the time that they accepted the Torah, they accepted it fully. All the way. Yes.
You said you can't complete transaction if something's not there.
Doesn't exist.
But if you sell me a property and it's a piece of land and you show me a picture and I'm paying for the construction that you've arranged to be there, is that not, and we sign on it, is that not? Big shilas. You can buy the property, but you know that the building has not yet been built. You can have someone commit themselves to do their part in building the building, but you cannot purchase something that doesn't exist. So you can't finish that transaction. You can do the transaction on a piece of land that exists. The builder can sign a commitment that he's going to build it, but you cannot buy something that doesn't exist. Because that's really what we did at Mount Torah. When was the transaction completed? Transaction could be completed when it existed. When did it exist? By Mount Torah. So in other words, if the builder drops out, I can get my money back. That's because he didn't keep his commitment. But it's not that you bought the building that doesn't exist. I'm not
Hashem made them convert.
Hashem gave them the Torah.
So they still accepted.
Fine. So they're allowed to accept. But the idea of an immersion completing the process did not exist by then. And therefore, that immersion was not forbidden on Shabbos. The Rambam says you have a bezdin, right? When do you have a bezdin? You have a bezdin when you complete the process. That's when you need a bezdin there. Here there was no completing of the process, didn't need a bezdin. The bezdin was by Matan Torah. That was the completing of the process.
Can I ask you, if somebody converts, what they've got in mind, they'll keep they're not going to solve it. They're going to they're not going to cover their head. Is that a problem?
If they know that they're obligated in the Torah to cover their hair.
Yeah.
If somebody told them that it's only a hidur mitzvah, and they believed it, and they accepted upon themselves whatever they knew to be, that's one thing. But if they know that Torah requires this and this, and they say, no, I'm only keeping 612 mitzvahs of the Torah, 613th I'm not keeping. Then as far as I know, again, you'll ask her of, as far as I know, that's not considered Kabbalah mitzvahs.
But then later on, when they say that they were wrong when they put on, they cover their head, does that, they don't have to reconvert?
Let the Dayanim work it out.
But it is a problem.
If a person knows that this is part of Torah mitzvahs and they say that part of not doing, I think it makes it's a big shine. It doesn't know that it's part of Torah mitzvahs. So whatever I know is part of Torah mitzvahs, I take on. And the Bezdin has an obligation to make it clear to them, and there's basic rules what the Bezdin has to tell them.
Follows everything, covers their head. Assuming this is a married woman, or a man, and somebody says, well, why am I bothering? Because he or she was born Jewish, they don't, so I'll uncover. Does that...
So the question is, when do they say, why am I bothering? After the conversion or at the conversion? After the conversion, once they're a full-fledged Jew, then they're the same as every other full-fledged Jew. They keep the mitzvahs, they're doing the right thing. If they don't keep the mitzvahs, they're doing the wrong thing. But to become a Jew, you have to accept upon themselves all the mitzvahs. Sincerely. Okay, anyway. So this helps us understand why the Ramban and the other Mefarshim want to say that it happened only after Matan Torah. Because what kind of a Naso and Nishma can there be on the whole Torah when the whole Torah doesn't exist yet? So they're more comfortable learning that it happened on the morning after Matan Torah. Because after they had the whole Torah, that's when they said Naso and Nishma. That's when they immersed. That's when they had the blood of the sprinkled upon them. And that's when they completed the games.
What do they have to wait for the next morning? It's at Kabbalah Sator,
because that was only the Kabbalah HaMitzvahs. But just like nowadays, in order for a ger to enter into the covenant properly, he needs to also have Milah, Tefillah, and Artzos carbon. So they also needed that. So even though they accepted all upon themselves all the mitzvahs by Matan Torah, but they still needed to go through the technical process of conversion. And according to the Ramban and Even Ezra, that was completed on the next day. But according to the Gemara in Shabbos and according to Rashi, it was a preparation that took place on the previous day. And on the day of Matan Torah, it was completed by Hashem revealing himself to them and telling them that the Aseres HaDibros.
So Rabbi Yossi
So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that it was on Shabbos morning. It was the day of the morning of Matan Torah. It's fine. It's just before Matan Torah. They did it as a preparation for Matan Torah. But that didn't clinch it. That didn't make the conversion a proper conversion. What made the conversion a proper conversion is when Hashem revealed himself to them and told them, Aseres HaDibros. That's what completed the conversion. And that's not a prohibition on Shabbos. You're allowed to tell people Aseres HaDibros on Shabbos. Okay?
Ask with regards to the Tashlum, you said it, the first days of Pesach.
Yeah, let me just complete this one point, and then I'll come to your question in a minute. Not to be sorry, I just want to. One of the things we can learn from this is what an amazing thing it is, this Yom Tov of Shavuos, that we've received the Torah. Because at first glance, you can ask yourself, let me go back a little bit. We mentioned many times the Medrash. The Medrash says that mashal of a king that had two countries, Rami and Syria, and he made a decree Now, the people from Rami cannot descend to Syria. The people from Syria can't descend to Rami. There's a closed border. You can't come here. You can't go there. One day, the king decided that he wants to change his mind. From now, he's opening the border, and now it's going to be permissible to cross the border either direction. He said, "Ba'ani hamaskon, I'll be the first one to cross the border." Yeah. Similarly, Hashem, when He created the world, He said, "The heaven is for Hashem, and the earth is for man." In other words, heavenly creatures don't come down to earth, and earthly creatures don't go up to heaven. The spiritual remains heavenly, and the physical remains earthly. Two don't mix. Hashem decided to give the Torah. He said, from now on, all that's changing. Heaven can come down to earth, and earth can rise up to heaven. I'll be the first one to cross. Shenemar, as it says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem descended on Har Sinai, and He told Moshe to come up to Hashem. Yeah. So the question is this the first time that Hashem manifested Himself on earth? Didn't Hashem speak to Adam and tell him you can eat from all the trees of the garden, and you can't eat from the Eitz Hadas? Didn't Hashem speak to Noach and tell him to build a teva? Didn't Hashem appear to Avram and to Yitzchak and to Yaakov? Didn't Hashem appear to Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush and say, Moshe, Hineni? What do you mean by Niyam Aschel? I'm the first time that Hashem is coming into the world. The answer is that what happened by Matan Torah never happened before. That the infinite essence of Hashem, not just some kind of an external revelation, the infinite essence of Hashem should come down to earth and give Himself over to human beings in the way that Hashem did by Matan Torah. That's unprecedented. And therefore, it's impossible for the Jewish people to have accepted Torah before this happened. Because such a Torah didn't exist. A Torah that said, that the Torah and the Almighty are literally one. A Torah where where Hashem says, I've taken my very essence, I've written it into the Torah and I've handed it over to you. Abraham Avinu didn't have such a Torah. Yitzchak didn't have such a Torah. Yaakov didn't have such a Torah. Shevet Levi Messiah didn't have such a Torah. Even when Hashem appeared to Moshe at the burning bush, it wasn't such a revelation. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that Hashem's infinite essence should be revealed on Har Sinai and give Himself over to the Jewish people in the Torah and every mitzvah. That when we study Torah, the Torah that we're studying, as we learn Tanya, is one with Hashem Himself. And that the mitzvahs that we perform are a connection, a tzavsa v'chibur with the infinite essence of Hashem. That's unprecedented. And that explains why Shavuos is such an incredible Yom Tov. Because at first glance you could ask, what's the big deal? They had Torah before. Avraham Avinu learned Torah, Yitzchak learned Torah, Yaakov learned Torah, Shevet Levi learned Torah, Yeshiva Shem Be'ever taught Torah. What's the big deal that Hashem gave the Torah? The answer is it's a whole different experience. It's a whole different thing. It's got nothing in common with what was there before. Is that clear?
And we could have said that because everyone was there. I mean, even the Shavuot and so on.
True. But what they were given, that Aniyah Maschil, Hashem says, the first time that I'm coming down to earth and giving myself over to we mentioned in Tanya for Pesach also that we say in Yom Tov and davening, Matitan lonu Hashem Elokeinu ba'agos yom chaga me'adim l'simcha chaga v'zman l'sosei yom chaga shavuos, right? So the simple meaning is, Matitan lonu Hashem Elokeinu, you Hashem our God have given us. What have you given us? You've given us festivals, you've given us this, you've given us that, you've given us Shabbos, you've given us Shavuos, right? The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Matitan lonu, what have you given us? The first thing on the list is Hashem Elokeinu. You've given us Hashem Elokeinu, you've given us Hashem. Because the Torah and Hashem are one. And that happened by Matan Torah. Never happened before. Sorry, you're asking about Tashlum.
No, just you said before that Pesach, this Tashlum is still here. What about last day when it ends?
Last days of what?
Of Yom Tov.
We're not talking about the Karban Musa. We're talking about the Oyla Siriyah and the Shalmei Chagiga. Every individual that came to the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Tov had to bring a minimum of 2 karbanos. 1 carbon Oyla to fulfill the mitzvah of Lo Yero Panei Reikam, therefore it's called Oyla Siriyah. When you appear in the Beis Hamikdash, you have to bring a gift. You can't come empty-handed. That's the burnt offering that is brought when you come to the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Tov. And it's the Shalmei Chagiga, the mitzvah of Chagiga, of Chagoisa. You have to celebrate. You celebrate with a carbon Shalom. Yeah, there's also Shalmei Simcha, but this is the minimum. The minimum is Oyla Siriyah and Shalmei Chagiga. When do you bring it? So, ideally, bring it Yom Tov. Yeah, the question of an Oyla can be brought on Yom Tov, B'Shamay B'Silol. But what if you couldn't bring it on Yom Tov, or if Yom Tov fell on Shabbos, you couldn't bring any of the karbanos? So you have until 7 days to make up for it. It's called Yemei Tashlum. So in Pesach and Sukkot, those 7 days are Chol HaMoed. In the case of Pesach, the last day Yom Tov. Right? But on Shavuos, there is no Chol HaMoed, and there is no 7 days Yom Tov. So the 7 days are the day of Yom Tov, plus the 6 days following Yom Tov. Which is why, until tomorrow night, we're still in the process, we're still in the environment and the atmosphere of Yom Tov, because Yidden who came to the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Tov, we're still bringing their karbanos until tomorrow. Tomorrow's the 7th day, starting from Friday. That's why we don't say Tachlis. We're still celebrating.
If it was such a one-time event, how can we everything should have the same? How can we create the same thing?
So first of all, we don't create it. Hashem creates it. Hashem gives us the opportunity to invite it through our celebration. Arizal says on the pasuk in the Megillah, "Hayamim ha'ela niskarim v'na'asim." Hayamim ha'ela niskarim v'na'asim. These days are remembered and reenacted. Yeah. So he says that when we remember it through our celebration of the Yom Tov, it causes it to be reenacted. Hashem brings that revelation down again. And the Rebbe says that it's not just a repeat performance of what happened last year and the year before. Ma'ilum b'kodesh, in all matters of Kedusha, we go higher and higher. So every year when we re-experience Matan Torah, we're re-experiencing it in a more intense manner than it was the first time. And more intensely than it was last year, and last year's more intensely than the year before, and so on and so forth. So this year, Matan Torah is the most incredible Matan Torah there ever was. And therefore, our simcha should be greater than ever before. And the way that we connect to it, and the chlotas tables that we take, it all it's amazing. How we feel it. That's a question of how much we refined ourselves. But the klal is that, remember the story about the wagon driver and the horses and the wagon driver and the professor. Remember that? Should I repeat it or you remember it? So the Rebbe Rashab said, just because the horses, are you familiar with the story I'm talking about? With the horses and the wagon driver and the professor in the back? Does that ring a bell? No?
Yes.
I'll repeat it in case anybody doesn't remember. The Rebbe Rashab told a story. There were two young maskilim, people from the Enlightenment movement, that said they don't believe in any of the spiritual stuff. They don't really relate to it. They don't feel it. They don't see it. So the Rebbe Rashab said to them that there were once two Frenchmen, French professors that came to Russia. And the Russians are generally peasants. So all the intelligentsia came from France. So the two French professors came to deliver a paper in a conference in Russia. And they had to travel from one town to another. So they went by horse and buggy. Now, the horse and buggy, there was a coachman that took care of the horse and buggy. He was a Russian peasant that was looking after the horse and buggy. So you had over here the horses. Behind the horses was the coachman. And behind the coachman were the passengers, the professors. So everybody has, that said to Rabbi Rashab, their perspective on the voyage, on the journey. The horse's perspective on the journey is, why are they traveling from one town to the other? So they figure probably they ran out of animal feed. They ran out of oats, whatever they give them in the hay. There's no more straw. There's no more hay this town. Therefore, they're traveling to the next town to have the next meal. And their theory is proven right, because when they arrive at the next town, they go into the stable in the back of the tavern, and they give them hay. So look at this, we've proven right. That's the purpose of the journey, is that we should be able to have some more hay. Yeah? The coachman is much cleverer than the horses. He knows that there's more animal feed in the first town. The reason to travel to the next town is not because you need animal feed. You could have sorted it out in the first town. The reason for the journey to the town is because when he arrives at his destination, he gets his fare. He can go into the tavern and have a drink. So he's much more sophisticated than the horses. He understands the purpose of the journey in a much deeper way than the horses do. Right? And then back of the carriage, there's the French professors. Their perspective on the journey is they're going to deliver a paper that their brilliance that they've worked on in a lifetime, and they're going to share it in the next town. So the Rebbe Rashab turned to these young men and he said, tell me, because the horse's perspective is hay and straw, therefore the professors are not professors? In other words, does the horse's perspective create the reality? The reality is the reality, whether the horse understands or doesn't understand. So you ask him, do we feel? If we do feel or we don't feel, it's irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant as far as our feelings are concerned, but it's not relevant as far as reality is concerned. Reality is not dictated by what we feel. Reality is dictated by what the reality is. The reality is that every year in Shavuos is Zman Matan Torah Seinu. It's the season of the giving of our Torah, which means Hashem gives the Torah anew to every single Jew, men, women, and children, and He gives Himself with the Torah. Most amazing thing, most incredible thing. Yes?
This is what the point that from then on we could elevate the material things, not just ourselves.
Correct. Also, from Matan Torah on, we have the power to elevate the physical, which is the idea of Tachtonim Yalu Al Yonim, that the earthly can rise up. And that is because it's coming from the essence of Hashem. Because normally there is spirituality and this physicality. And they're in two different realms. They don't have anything to do with each other. Rationally speaking, they have nothing to do with each other. This glass just sat through an amazing shiur. Yeah? Did it become any wiser? It's a physical glass. It doesn't understand the whole conversation. It's not its language. So it's got nothing to do with it, right? But nevertheless, that's only according to the rules of creation, that the spirituality remains in the spiritual realm and the physical remains in the physical realm. But the essence of Hashem transcends that divide, and He can break that barrier. So when Hashem's essence came down on Har Sinai, that made it possible for the physical reality of this physical world to become elevated to godliness. So when I take an object and I make a mitzvah out of it, that object becomes holy, it becomes godly. So the parchment on which the Sefer Torah is written doesn't remain an animal hide. It becomes a holy parchment on which Sefer Torah is written. It's the holiest thing that we have. So the mitzvahs have the power to be able to transform the physical into the godly. And the reason they have that power is because in it is invested the infinite essence of Hashem, which came at Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, we didn't have the power to take the physical and transform it, as you just said. When Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov performed mitzvahs with the physical object, that physical object did not become godly. But when we, after Matan Torah, perform a mitzvah with a physical object, that physical object becomes holy, becomes godly. It's connected to the same concept because it's the essence of Hashem there, and that transcends any divide between any barriers and any divide between physical and spiritual. Therefore, we now have the power to make the physical godly.
So when we learn on Shavuos, things Hashem is there.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah. Exactly. Not only on Shavuos, the whole year round. From Shavuos, we get the koyach for the whole year. It pleases Him. Okay, we're going to hold it over here. If anybody wants to hold on to your papers, you may. If you want to return them, I'll take them back.